in that recording. Okay, so let me just share my screen. Okay, so anyone can just confirm if you're able to see my screen before I proceed. Anyone to just confirm if they're able to see my screen? Brilliant. Thank you very much, Mbizai, for your response. Okay, so good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are around the world. I'm assuming we also have participants joining us from certain parts of the world. So welcome to session number 2 of our training series on KoboToolbox. So today, in session number 2, we're basically going to be dwelling much on the practical aspects, or rather hands-on experience with designing forms with the KoboToolbox, FormBuilder, and XLS form. So my name again is Kumbirai Matingo, and I'm your co-host. I'm your host today, and also the KoboToolbox ambassador for Zimbabwe. So just a brief profile about myself. So yeah, my name is Kumbirai, and I'm currently the KoboToolbox ambassador for Zimbabwe. And I'm also an M&E practitioner. So M&E basically stands for monitoring, evaluation, and learning. I'm also an M&E practitioner and a GIS specialist working in the humanitarian sector. And additionally, I'm also an assistant lecturer with the Department of Surveying and Geomatics at the Midlands State University. So I've also included my email address and my profile URL if anyone also would like to connect with me. I've also included the details on the presentation, which I'll also be able to share with you at the end. So just a run through for the agenda for today. So today is going to be more about form creation, or what others would normally call building a survey. So we're going to learn about the aspects of building a survey, whereby we're going to be creating our first new form for the new users. And then for returning users that have been using KoboToolbox for a while, you're also going to be learning some new features which also have been embedded into KoboToolbox, and also getting to just having like a refresher and appreciation of how KoboToolbox can advance your work in data collection in the humanitarian sector. And throughout the session, we're also going to be exploring the question types that are available on KoboToolbox, the question options that you can also leverage, and also going to be adding on some advanced features whereby you can group questions, add repeats, and tweak, or rather change the appearance of questions that are appearing on your forms. And then finally, you're also going to look at skip logic and validation, and then we can have our final form in the KoboCollect application. So just to reiterate from the previous session, where we looked at some of the intuitive form builder like tools that we have. So you currently have 25 plus question types that are available on KoboToolbox, and it also provides you with form logic. So that's the repeat group, skip logic, and the validation that you can also use in your forms. And then there's also what is known as XLS form. We'll touch briefly on that and so that you get an appreciation. And then we also are going to look at how you can translate your forms into your own local language. So the main language that is on KoboToolbox is English. So you can also convert your forms into Shona, Ndebele, or even French, or any other language that you want to convert to. So KoboToolbox also has a question library for standardizing data, where you can just save common questions that you can also have, whenever you're going to be building any surveys. So right now, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be basically dwelling into the platform demonstration. So throughout this demonstration phase, we are actually going to be using the KoboToolbox, the KoboToolbox application on the web. So let me just get into that. So let me just reshare my screen. So just some housekeeping rules. If you have any questions that may come along during the course of this presentation, please feel free to just type them in the chat box, and then we can get to the questions yeah, whenever we're going to be having any breaks like throughout the session. Okay. So yeah, let me just so this is the attendance registration form link again. Let me just share it again in the chat box just to have anyone who just joined us to fill in their name and their email address so that they can be able to get a certificate by the end of this session. Okay. So before we actually go on to the KoboToolbox platform, I would just like to take a few moments to just mention this. So whenever we are about to go like into the field, it is quite essential for us to first design our questionnaire that we're going to be using whenever we're going to be going out in the field. So normally, experience with using paper forms, I'm sure they're really familiar with this process where you have to design the questionnaire and then you then have to print it. And then after printing it, you then use that questionnaire in the field. So this is the same process again, now that we are in the digital era. So I'll like normally whenever I design any forms, I like to use this template, which only has about 3 columns. So that is the, yeah, so that is the question number, the question itself, and the response type and options that I'll be needing for each and every question. And then just before I get into the questions that I'll be asking the respondents, I like to always place a description that helps the respondents to know what the survey is all about. I've seen this like in most cases, whenever someone is deploying a research questionnaire, they just provide the respondent of the background of what they are intending to capture and what they intend to use the data for. So this is also a good practice that you should also implement whenever you're going to be carrying out any field surveys, or even if it's an online questionnaire. And then once you've outlined the purpose of the survey, then you start to design the questions. So you notice that by designing all your questions into this kind of questionnaire template or the questionnaire design form, you'll be able now to see where your questions come in handy in line with the objectives of the survey, because every survey is an objective. So this will also help you to understand if your questionnaire is actually meeting the objectives of the survey. So once you design that, then you also state the question options that are also key. So for example, you'll be asking someone like their name. So you would require that person to just generally enter their name by entering it as a free text. So you indicate that as well in the last column. And then if it's a response that requires prefixed like responses, for example, if you're asking someone to enter in their gender, you can have like 3 options. That is the male, the female, and the other. And then they get to also to fill in that with pre-filled responses. So pre-filled responses also allow the survey to have like clean data, and it also allows you to prevent that process whereby you have to go through the data cleaning process. So without wasting much time on this, I'll go straight into the KoboToolbox platform. So assuming that we all have an account, a KoboToolbox account that we have created from the first session. So if you are still new to KoboToolbox, your KoboToolbox platform will probably look like this, whereby you don't have like any forms which are currently appearing on your KoboToolbox form. So the first thing that we're going to do now is we want to design a new form that we're going to be using to capture data on KoboToolbox. So the first thing is to navigate to this new button. So the new button allows us to then create a new form. So for this session, we're going to be building our form from scratch. However, we also have other various options that you can use to build your form. So I'll talk about the other options later on throughout like this session. So once you click on build from scratch, so I'm just you then need to name your form with the project name. So I'll just call this session 2 demo. Yeah, session 2 demo form, and then you can just place a description. So I'll just say this is the demonstration form for session number 2, and then you enter the sector which you're currently collecting data for. So just type in information management and then the country in which you're going to be collecting data for. So if you're going to be collecting data in multiple countries, you can also add any other multiple countries where you're going to be collecting the data for. So I'll only be doing this for Zimbabwe. So I will remove Zimbabwe and then I'll create my project. So once you have created your project, you'll be taken to this page. So this page is now the form builder page. So this is where all the form design like takes place. So you will see a lot of buttons which also exist on your form. So I'll explain more on these buttons as we go throughout like this session. So I will just close this side panel. Okay, so if you have named your form like in a wrong way, you always have an option to rename it at the top here. So I'll just add demonstration in full, and then you can also save that. So one thing I also like to mention is that whenever you're going to be building any forms, it's also key and essential to keep saving your form. So if you make any edits in your form, the save button will add an asterisk to your button, which just notifies you that there's some new information or new additional functionality that needs to be saved. So it's also key to save your form after every edition of every question. So the questionnaire that we're going to be using for this is this same like survey 2 questionnaire that we've already designed. So I'll also share this questionnaire at the end of this session. Okay. So now that we have our questionnaire outlined, we know what we want to do. I'll just mention that whenever you're going to be creating a new question or using the form builder, you simply need to click on this plus sign button, which is to your left. So if you click on that, it will open up a prompt where it will ask you to add a question. So this is where now you enter in the name of the question. So remember, our first question was, what is your name? So I'll just type, what is your name? And then click on add question. So after clicking on add question, this is where now you then get to select the question type that you are going to be using. So remember, we mentioned that there are over 25 plus question types which exist on KoboToolbox. So since I've outlined here that this is going to be a text question type, I'll simply go back and then look for the text question type. So that means I'll want people to fill in their names without having to be prompted for any input that is already sort of like pre-configured. So yeah, so I've added that question, and then once the question has been added, you can then see that on the save button there's an asterisk, which means that our form has a new entry and needs to be saved. So I'll just click on save. Okay, so now that the form has been saved, you see that some of the buttons which were over to the left, to the top left corner, have been activated. For example, this eye icon. So this is the preview form button that is used to preview your form. So if ever you design a form and you'd like to see how your form looks like, you will always click on the preview form, and then a preview of your form will be able to appear. So as you can see, I've named this as session 2 demonstration, and I've added my question, which is going to be what is your name? So I'll just quickly enter my name, and then I'll click on validate. So this shows me that my question is actually valid. Okay, so now we need to add the second question, which is asking what is your gender. So to add another question, you go back to that plus sign button, and then you type the name of the question. So what is your gender? And then you go on add question. So this time, I would like someone to enter in their gender. So they can be either male, female, or any other gender. So this requires them to select just one response. So I'll go over and select this select one option. So once I select one option, it's going to extend like the field by providing me this input box, which says option 1 and option 2. So this is where I place the options which they are going to be using to fill out the form. So in this case, I'll start with male, and then on option 2, they could be female. And if I want to add another option, I'll just click on this button, which says click to add another response. So that adds up to option 3. And then I just enter other. And then I go back and then I save that form. And then if you go again on the form preview, it will also then allow you to preview the form. So we have our name and we have our select one option where they can select like their gender. Okay, so now that we have covered the text field and the select one, we'll now go on to using the select menu. So select menu generally allows us to enter more than one response. So I'll go through the same process again. So this time I'm going to ask which of the following sports can you play? So that is the question that I would like to ask. And then I click on add question and then I select on select menu. So this is where I'm going to enter all the names of the sports that I would like the respondents to select from. So in this case, I'll start with rugby, and then I'll go to soccer, and then I'll add another option again. Perhaps I'll add tennis, and then hockey, and then I could also add in volleyball, and then lastly I can add squash. Okay, so I've added in my options, and then as always, I always remember to save my form. So as we are building this form, you start to notice that the form is now expanding like in a long way, and you might not necessarily need to keep seeing responses that way in your previous question. So to remove this, you just simply need to click on this arrow. So it will then sort of like collapse the question that we've already came from. So I would collapse that question, and then I can also collapse this current question. So now that I've saved, I can also go back again and to go back and preview like the form. So that will also take a while to load depending on your network. So let's just quickly rush to the new question. So as you can see, I can select the number of sports that I'm able to play. So I'm able to play rugby, I'm able to play hockey, and I'm able to play volleyball. So you can see I can also select many options. So in this case, I've just selected 3. Or if someone plays all the sports, they are also able to select all the sports that they can be able to play. Okay, so moving on, I'll talk about an interesting feature. So there's one interesting feature which is more or less related to legal issues. So you will notice that nowadays, if you go on any website, there is a cookie consent that always appears like on that website. So this is more of like an EU like regulation that was passed to say any websites that are being served in the EU, or probably I think it's now around the world, should have a cookie consent. So this basically means that whoever is going to be viewing that should consent to having their data being taken into account. So we can also introduce this into our surveys. So this is normally done through a question type that is called an acknowledgement. So you can use an acknowledgement to say if you are creating a form whereby you'd like people to sign up for an event, you can then allow them to acknowledge that they accept that participating in this event will mean that all the sessions will be recorded, and that the host will be able to contact them via email. So I believe we all noticed this when we were also registering for this session. So I'll go over and demonstrate that. So I'll just enter the statement. So I'll just say, by signing up, you agree to our terms and conditions. So this is the most common statement that is used. And then I'll click on add question. So the acknowledgement question type is over here. It's usually to the far right, and the third option on the bottom. So you just add that acknowledgement statement, and then you can just also save that. So if we preview our form, we will notice that it will provide us with an option that says, by signing up, you agree to our terms and conditions. So that means if someone is agreeing to the terms and conditions, then they have to click on OK, and then they submit like that form. So that's also a key important feature that is also very, very essential whenever we're going to be building any forms in order for us to avoid any legal issues that might occur. So I'll quickly go through and demonstrate the other question types. So for example, you can also add like numbers. So for example, I can ask how many cars do you have? And then I just basically go on to select the number question type. So while I'm still here, I would also like to mention that we have the number question type, and then we also have the decimal question type. So for the number, this can be used to enter only integer numbers. But if you have any numbers that you'd like to enter where there are going to be any decimal places, you can then also use the decimal question type. So quickly go over to number, and then this will ask the person how many cars they have, and it only allows them to enter numbers. They cannot enter any text into their box. And then we also have what is your date of birth? So I'll quickly rush through some of the basic stuff so that we touch through some of the key points whereby users might, or rather normally face challenges. So let's just preview this to see how the date question looks like. So in this case, I've added it as date and time. So whenever you select a date and time, there's this sort of like a calendar widget, which also appears and allows you to select the date, and then also you can also select the time on which, like at which that person was born. If you don't want to have this time component, there's also a date only question type that you can use, and then you can avoid this time. Okay, so now that we're all familiar with some of the basics, I think from the respondents that answered the survey to join this session, I noticed that most of them were coming from a GIS background. So let me just go through the GIS questions that we have. So for example, if I add another question, so I'll start with the basics. So whereby you can say, where are you? So in this case, I would like to record the GPS coordinate as a point of where we all are. So this will be a GIS point that will be recorded. But however, on KoboToolbox, we also have other additional features and functionality. For example, we can record a path in the form of a line, and then we can also record an area in the form of a polygon. So in this case, I'll add the point, and then I'll also add property boundary, and then I'll add the area, and then I'll click that on save, and then I'll also want to preview so that we see how this will appear. So while it was still here, I'd also like to mention that if we're using Encanto, so Encanto is the browser version for responding to a survey. So the survey that we all responded to when we're interested in this session, that type of form that we used is known as Encanto. So Encanto web forms are used for responding to surveys on the web. And then if you'd like to respond to surveys on a mobile device, that is then where we use KoboCollect. So in this case, we're currently using Encanto. So this is how the form will appear on Encanto. So if I just click on this location button, it will then allow me to then prompt the user where they are currently are. I think there's something like to do with the location's permission of where I'm currently at, which is why it hasn't like automatically located my location. But in the event that you also know the location that the respondent is coming from, you can basically also add like a point feature. Yeah, just like that. And then it can automatically record the point feature, or you can use the locate me feature. And one thing that you also need to do is you need to allow your browser to be able to take like your location. And then we move on to the boundary, to the area question type. So for example, let's say we'd like to digitize an area boundary of where we currently want to do a survey, or where we want to have our property sort of like registered. So I'll zoom in, to an area. Yeah, so let's just say we are in this area and would like to have like our boundary, yeah, sort of like registered. I think there's something with the best map. It could be my network, but once we can click on a line like that, and then we digitize the boundary. And then one thing that we also need to take into account is that we always need to end where we started from. So if I click there, that means our boundary has been closed, and then automatically it also tells us how many hectares that boundary currently has, and also provides us with the center coordinates. And then also you're able to see that also like on a map of where we would have digitized that. So you're also able to switch between base maps. So we have the satellite base map, we also have the terrain base map, and we also have the street like base map. Yeah, just like that. And then we can be able to see where our digitized fields are. Okay. So let me just quickly check in the chat box to see if we have any questions. It looks like we do not have any questions, but if we have any questions, please feel free to just enter in your questions in the chat box, and then I'll come back to those. And then also allow me to reshare the participants registration form, which will also allow you to get a certificate by the end of this session. Okay. So let's just go back to that. So we also have another interesting field that we can use. So let's say you are designing a form where you want your students to upload an assignment via KoboToolbox. So this will be more of like a file. So you can have that question, upload your assignment, and then you can then choose a file type. So the file type then now allows them to add in any files that are currently on their device. So let's just see how that looks like. Okay, so if they are to click on this link, it will then open up their sort of like their desktop, and then allow them to submit any files that would like to submit also like to this form. Okay. So another thing that I'd also like to mention is that we also have some additional functionality on the form. So for example, if you have any other mandatory questions that would like respondents to respond to. So for example, I would like to know the names of everyone that will be responding to this questionnaire. So that means this field would then be like denoted as a required field. So to add a required field, you simply need to go to the settings. So the settings button is located over this icon, which is to the right of every question. So if I need to navigate to the settings of any question, I just need to go to the question, and then I click on the settings button. So when I open on the settings button, there are a lot of like additional features and functionality that also exist. So over here, we have the data column name, the guidance hint, and the mandatory response. So I'd like this question to be mandatory. So I'll just simply click on yes. So if you notice on the question, there's an asterisk which has been added to the left of the question that says, what is your name? So that means from now on, from now onwards, no one can be able to submit this form without filling in this question. And then while it was still here, I'll also I'll also be able to explain on the question hint. So the question hint basically means that you are providing your form respondents with more options to more of like an example, or more of like demonstrating what the question requires. So in this case, I'll illustrate using the what is your name question. So here we can specify that we need the respondent to enter your full name, and then we also place an example. So an example is Joe. Like Joe Biden, like this. And then whenever that person is going to be responding, they are being told that this question requires you to enter your full name, and here's an example that you can use. And then, so that is that for the for the question hint. And then over to the data column name. So the data column name is how your question is referred to like on your survey. So you will notice that whenever we're going to be applying any skip logic or any calculations. So the data column name is also how your form will appear. Is more of like the variable name to your question. So by default, KoboToolbox assigns a default variable name to your question. So in this case, I'd like to change this data column name to name so that I can be able to reference it in my form like later on. So my data column name is now name. So I will be able to reference this name in my form like later on. And then the guidance hint, this is just more of like a hidden explanation that is also shown to the user whenever they request for it. So I'll just enter that this is a hidden explanation. And then when I'm done with this, I can also be able to save that form and then be able to preview like how it looks like. So here you will notice that the form is also changed. So you notice that my question hint appears here, telling the user what is required of them from this question. And then an asterisk is also been added onto the question, indicating that this is a required field. And then the guidance is also hidden in case they also face any challenges. So if they also require more details and explanation, you can also provide it underneath this guidance hint. So let's not fill anything in this form for now. And since all the other questions are optional, let's try to validate and see what comes out. So if I try to submit this form without any response in the what is your name question, it tells me that your form contains errors. Please see fields marked in red. So then it then tells you that this is a required field and you cannot submit without it being filled in. So as you can see, currently we have a very small box here. So let's say in the event that we have a question that wants us to capture a long paragraph. So let's assume that this question has been converted into a long paragraph question whereby we need to have a respondent entering, maybe it's a motivation for them to attend a conference. We can also come here where it says appearance, and then we select an appearance that says multi-line. So we can add multi-line, and then we save that. You will notice that the form appearance on this text field is going to be a bit different. So the form is going to have like a little more room and space, which can also be adjusted. And then one can enter their text also as paragraphs, and maybe they're trying to justify why they basically need to attend a certain conference. So that provides us with more room. So let me just, yeah. Okay, so let me just close this for now, and then we move on to the next logic that we're going to be applying. Okay, so over here, I'm going to be displaying what is known as a rating question. So if you look over here on my screen, let me just try to increase the font. Okay, so over here on my screen, I have what is known as a rating question. So a rating question is more of like a question which shares the same like the same responses. For example, I will be asking you after the session how you rate the training. So we're going to be rating this training in 3 aspects. We're going to be rating the content and the delivery and the pace at which this session was delivered. So instead of me creating a select one question, and then I repeat again these same responses over and over again, I'm just going to create what is known as a rating question. So a rating question allows me to just group up everything into one, and then they can share the same responses. So let's just see how we can implement this. So we go back into our KoboToolbox form builder, and then we click on this plus sign. So I'm just going to ask, how do you rate this session? And then I click on add question. So in this case, I'm going to be looking for the rating question. So I'll look for the rating question, where is my rating? Okay, so my rating question is over here. So once I click on that, then it's going to provide me with a different interface. So as you can see here, to my left, we have a column that says enter your question. So this is where we begin to enter all the questions that I would like to ask. So in this case, I want you to rate my like this session in terms of the content that is currently being shared. I also want you to rate this in terms of the delivery of this session. And then lastly, I'd also want you to rate this in terms of the pace at which we are currently moving at. So in this case, I think I was entering like in the wrong field. So let me just delete that and then I'll enter that. So I'll say content here, add another question, and then I would like you to rate the delivery. And then I'd also want you to rate the pace. So what I was editing before, this is also known as the data column name for this rating question. So if I want the data column name for this rating question to be referenced later on, I can also edit it in this field. So here it says automatic because KoboToolbox is going to try to come up with that in an automatic way. So now that, remember, I have my options, which I would like to implement across like this question. So I'm going to ask whether or not the content delivered was excellent, was it good, was it an average performance, or was it very, very poor? So let me now add those options. So the options now basically come in here. So I'm just going to say, was it excellent? And then was it good? Now that you see we're provided with two columns to add in our options by default. So if we ever want to add another column, we can also add by clicking this plus sign. So I'll just go over and add an average. And then I'll add the poor. So it's going to be asking, how do you rate this session under 3 categories, whereby each category also shares the same responses with any other category. So I'll save that. So one thing that I also want to mention, okay, let me just first preview this form before we talk about the next step. So let's just preview that to see how it's going to be looking like. Okay, so now you notice that our question is now here. It's asking, how do you rate this session in terms of content? So maybe it's good, the delivery, maybe it could be average, and the pace at which we are moving at, it could be poor or it could be excellent. So these are the responses which the participant will then need to enter in, and then these also can be shared like amongst all the questions. So what we have done in this case, we have grouped questions that could have come out as 3 questions into one question, which is sharing all the common names. So let me just save that, and then I minimize this, and then we go over to the next question. Okay, so the next question that is very, very common is also known as the question matrix. So the question matrix is also used to group all similar questions into one question, but asking different components of the question. So let's say, for example, we are carrying out a household survey whereby we want to check water drinking habits and the cost of meals in every participant that we're currently going to be surveying. So would like to ask the participants whether they took a glass of water during breakfast, during lunchtime, and during dinner. And then we also want to ask, then we also want to ask the cost of the meal during breakfast, lunch, and dinner again. And then if they took, or rather if they drank water, we also want to ask them how many liters of water they actually drank during breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So let's go over to our KoboToolbox, and then we add another question again. So now we say this is going to be a household survey matrix question. which assesses water, drinking habits, and costs of meals. Okay, so we then add that question, and then this is a matrix question. So we just go over to the question matrix. Okay, so as you have noticed that what we now need to do here is we have a row and column. So whenever we're going to be dealing with the question matrix, the row is more of like the categories which we want to ask the question on, and then the column is the question that we're going to be asking. So let's start with this column. So the label of this question is going to be, I'm going to be asking a select one field. So I'll just tick on select one. And then the question now that I'm going to be asking this person is that, did you drink water? Okay, so I'll just leave that, and then this is a required question. So the option that I'll provide here is either a yes or a no. And then the data column name. Okay, so this is the label, so I'll enter it in caps, and then this one I'll enter it in caps as well. Data column name, I'll place it as yes, and then I'll place this one as a no, and then I'll have that question. So now I need to enter in the row. So the row, this is going to be during breakfast, and then I've entered that, and then I can minimize that, and then I also enter that to say during lunchtime, and then I minimize that again, then during dinner. So remember, you can also edit the data column name if ever you want to use it in a, like in the survey. So let me just add this one as dinner. So remember, this question is going to be asking, did you drink any water? Yes or no during breakfast? Yes or no during lunch? Yes or no during dinner? So now we need to add the next question, which is asking the cost of the meal during breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So we go back again, and then we go to the next column. So this is going to be a number field. So I'm going to select the number, and then enter the question, which is the cost of the meal. So this is going to be in United States dollars, and then costs of meal. I'm also going to add this as a required question, and then I'll minimize. Okay. Looks like I clicked on the wrong thing, so I'll change the type and then bring it back. Okay, so it looks like I've clicked on the wrong question. So let me just redo this one. I had clicked on the wrong question. Let me just quickly go through this. So this was the previous question. The question that we are currently editing is the cost of meals. So I'd like them to enter the number on the cost of meals, and then, so this will then require them to enter that. So then I'll click on save. So one thing that I would also like to mention is that you see that we've been provided with a note here. So the note says the question matrix type only works in Encanto web forms using the grid style. So the grid style is what will enable you to view this grid question. So I also want to mention that the grid question type does not work whenever you're going to be using KoboCollect, unfortunately. So let me just save that. So now that we have been told that the grid style is the one that is needed for us to use this, I'll then go over to layout. So over here, where it says layout and settings, this is where we're able to change the layout and styling of our forms. So for us to use the grid style, I'll just simply click on the grid theme, and then I'll save that. So we also have other options for metadata, which I will discuss later on if we still have time. And then I'll close that, and then I'll preview this form. So you notice that the appearance of the form will also change slightly from what we were seeing. So you notice that this is now the grid theme that we're using, and I'll quickly rush through to the question. So as you can see, our question matrix question is has been outlined here for us, whereby it's asking if one has drank water during breakfast. So maybe they drank water and they didn't drink water during lunch, they drank water during dinner. Then the cost of the meal during breakfast, maybe this was $4, and maybe this was $6, and maybe this was $1. So then they also get to fill in all this information under one question, and also trying to minimize like the time that you take whenever you're going to be creating this question. So imagine you're going to ask each question separately to say, did you drink water during breakfast? It's another question. Did you drink water during lunch? It's another question. But this question matrix will allow you to combine all the questions which share some common features under one roof. Okay. So let me just quickly go into the chat box to see if we have any questions. I'm noticing that we are almost at the top of the hour. However, this is a 1.5 hour session, but we should also try to be wrapping up as much as we can. Okay, so let me just attend to the questions that are coming into the chat box while we are still here. So there's a question which says, how can I design a form with open access? Okay, so at the end of the session, I'll also be able to demonstrate that how we can design a form which can be filled in by anyone on the web. And then there's another question which says, is there any way one can link the Kobo data to GIS software? Yes, there's a way for you to link data to GIS software. I think I also posted a tutorial guide on my LinkedIn. I will share that in the chat towards the end of this session, whereby you can whereby you can see how you can automate some processes with GIS, and then you can be able to perform any automation functionality. Okay, so I think now that we've covered much in terms of this, I'll then go on to demonstrating on how we can be able to group questions. So if we have questions that are more or less in the same group, we can then group them. So in most surveys, we have questions that are rather in the demographic group. So this could be the name of the person, the gender of the person, and over here, the date of birth. So these are more of like demographic questions. So what I'll also demonstrate here is another feature whereby, let's say you have misplaced the question that you have created. Let's say you have created date of birth after you've asked them how many cars they own. You can also be able to move this question. So if you go on the question, if you go on the question under this tab, you see the plus sign on your cursor, then you just click, then you can be able to drag that question up. That means the date of birth question will be asked after the gender. So now I want to group my questions to say I only want to see demographic questions in their own group, so that it also allows me to be able to manage my survey. As you can see that it's now growing on like on and on. So in order for you to group like your questions, you simply need to click on the first question, then hold your control key, and then you click on the next question and on the other question. And then you then go over to this like to this panel where it says create group with selected questions. So create a group, and then these questions will now appear under this group. So if I expand that group, then those questions will now appear. So let's just change the name of the group to say this is a demographic question. So if there is any other question that you'd like to add into the demographic question, you can also hover on it, and then you drag it into the group. So you can also move questions in and between groups. So add this question, where are you here? Then add that back up again. And then now I can minimize that group. And then I can also be able to see my questions which fall within a group. Okay. So you can also add questions between any other questions. For example, I can add a question in between this. So for example. Yeah, for now, I'm not going to add that until I illustrate what we'll be doing next. Okay, so now what I want to do is to demonstrate the calculation question. So if I go over down here, so I'm going to be asking like two questions. So the first question that I'll be asking is the cost of buying a car. So if someone has said that they are currently owning two cars, I'll then ask them the average cost of the car, and then we'll use a calculate field now to calculate the importation duty of that car. So I'll go back to KoboToolbox, and then I'll just add this question under here. So let me just click on the how many cars question, and then I'll add this into a group. So I'll just call this group cars, right? And then I can also add a question within a group. So if you go into a group and then you hover on a question, you also see another plus button which appears, which is nested within a group. So I'll also add this question to say on average, how much does a car cost? So I'll require them to enter, maybe they could be entering a decimal value there, and then I can also save that. So now I've entered in like a question where they are being asked to enter a decimal field. So this is the cost of the car that they are currently having. And then I'll go on to enter another question. So here I'll just say total duty. Okay. So before we go over to this question, let's just demonstrate to see how this question will look like before we go any further. Okay, so our question on cars is right here. So they're going to be entering how many cars they have, and then here the average cost. So let's just say this is $839.64. So they are also able to enter in the number of cents there if there are any cents. So that is working really fine. So what I need to demonstrate now is to edit the data column name. So I'll go over to settings. So as you can see, the data column name here has been edited by default. So I'll change the data column name, and then I'll edit as cost of car. So this data column name that I would like to reference later on. So let me just copy this data column name, and then I'll then go over to create that calculate question. So in order for me to create a calculate question, I'll add a $sign and then add curly braces and then paste in the name of the data column name and then close my curly braces. And then I want to multiply this figure by a certain percentage. So let's say the cost of duty for each car is going to be at 15%. So I can multiply that by 0.5. And then I click on add question, and then I'll look now for the calculate question. So I'll enter that as a calculate question. So the question will be then calculate the cost of the car multiplied by the percentage duty that they are required to pay. So I'll then go over and add another question type here. So this question type, okay, before I go to the question type, I'll go over back to the settings. So the data column name by default, if it's your first calculation, it should then tell you that the data column name is the calculation. So I'll say this is the duty text, and then I'll also copy that, and then I'll then add another question. So I'll say duty text, add a colon there, and then I would want to reference the data column name there, and then I'll click on add question. So this one is going to be a note. So a note question basically just outlines, let's say if you would like to display any information. Remember, at the top of our survey, we said it's good to also add a description of what the survey is going to be all about. So a not question is one other key question type that you can also add. And then in this case, we are using the not question type to display the duty which this person is supposed to be paying. So let's save that and see if this is working. So I'll go over to preview the form. And notice there's some questions which are coming up in the chat box. I'll be attending to those shortly after this one. Okay, so we have entered the average cost. So let's say each car is going to be costing, we're just going to be say it's costing about 100,000. And then if we press enter, you see that our duty tax has been calculated for us automatically. So the calculate question allows us to also add or rather calculate any or rather sort of like to perform any calculations that we would want in our data. So just like we did here, we calculated the duty that is supposed to be paid for any car that is costing 100,000 at 15%. So in this case, they'll be paying 15,000 in duty. And then here we wish to display that duty amount to the person who's going to be responding to the survey. So this is how you can implement a calculate question. So let me just quickly go into the chat box to see if we have any question. Okay, I also want to auto-connect with visualization tools such as Power BI. Okay, so I think after the session, unfortunately, this session is more of just like touching on how to build forms, but I'll be able to share these resources after the session on, like there's an article that can be used to like connect to Power BI. I think this is also coming up in our next session. And then is there a way we can generate a CSV from KoboToolbox so that we can visualize in a GIS software? Okay, so yes, there's a way to generate a CSV. I would also demonstrate that at towards the end of this session. So this is normally found under the data column. Okay, so I think we have touched much on the calculation. So it also works to using the standard symbols for calculation. So I'll also be sharing another document as well, which also entails what symbols that you can use whenever you're going to be calculating any figures. So what I'll quickly go through is the skip logic. Okay, so let's say we are, okay, let me just group all these questions into one group so that we're able to manage our form in an easy way. So let me just group these. Let me just say last questions. And then I collapse this group. So let me just also add in these questions into this group so that we're able to manage the size of our form. Okay, so let's go back to the demographic question. So let's say I want to ask a question that is dependent on gender. So on gender here, we have whereby we can select either the male, the female, or their other. So let's assume that we have a respondent that is selected that they are the other gender. So we can also add a question here that says, please specify other gender, and then we will allow them to enter it as text. So what we have here is the responses from male, female, and other. So what we now do here is we want to enter these as variables. So if someone is selecting male, the variable for that is going to be stored as male. Then the variable for that is going to be stored as female. Then the variable for other is going to be stored as other. So this normally works whenever you're going to be using XLS forms. But for now, we're going to be using the form builder, which is pretty simple and straightforward. Okay, so let's say we want to only display this question, which allows them to specify other gender. Each time someone selects the other option, we then need to go over to the settings. And then in the settings panel, we then dash over to skip logic. So under skip logic, this is where we then enter in the logic to display this field. So we only want to display this if someone selects other. So I'll click over on add condition, then select the question from the list. So I would like to this to be determined by the question relating to gender. So I'll click on gender. So if gender is other, then that question will appear. So I will save that and then go over to preview my form to see how it's going to be looking like. Okay, so if someone was to enter male or female, that question is not going to appear. But if they select other, then this question for them to select their gender will then appear. So this is how basically skip logic works. So you are also not limited to the number of skip logic that you can apply. So let's assume we had another question before gender. You can also add to say, we can also add another question to say if their name is so-and-so, would like to ask them this type of question if their name relates to this person. So for now, we will not touch much on that. So another option is that if you add multiple criteria for skip logic, this button will appear. So this button basically allows you to enter whether or not you want all these criteria to be merged or you want any of the criteria to be merged. So if we had this first criteria on gender and the second criteria on name, so if we say all, that means if gender is merged and if the name is merged, then this question will be displayed. But if it's any, if the name or the gender is merged, then if any of that is merged, then the question will also display. So yeah, that's basically how this will also work. And then lastly, before we come to the end of the session, I also assumed that this session was going to be more of like a quick one. So I think we are now wrapping up. So what I would like to demonstrate lastly is what is known as a cascading select. So a cascading select is basically to say we have two questions. This is normally common whenever we are having a survey that is location dependent. So let's say we want to ask the participants to enter in their provinces. So in this case, we have a province, Harare and Manicaland. And if someone is to enter that their province is in Harare, we only want, and then like the next question, we'll be asking them to enter, and then like the next question, we'll be asking them to enter in their district. So instead of displaying all the districts in Zimbabwe, we only want to display the districts which are within Harare. Same as for Manicaland, we only want to display districts which are also within Manicaland. So that's Mutare, Makoni, and Chimanimani. So let's just see how we can also be able to implement this. So what I'll do in this case is I'll open an Excel sheet. So I've opened an Excel sheet in my Excel. Let me just zoom in so that we are able to see the fields. So over the top here, the first thing that I'll do is I'll label my my field column. So that the first field column, I'll label it as list name. The second one, I'll label it as name. And then the third one, I'll label it as label. Okay, so the name, so the list name is the variable which is relating to the question. So if it's going to be a province question, so this is going to be the province question. So I have two provinces. So I'll add two list names of the same type. And then the name now is the variable which is used to store that province. So let's just say this is Harare. And then what is displayed to the user is the actual text with the capital letter for Harare. And then I have Manicaland. Manicaland is the other variable. And then I have Manicaland as the label. Okay, so what I also have here is the districts. So the districts, we have a list of districts. So the first district here is Harare Urban. So that would be Harare urban. And then over here, I'll have Epworth. So over here, I'll also have it as Epworth. And then I'll also have Chitungwiza, and then Chitungwiza. Okay, so let's just skip to the other district. So I also have Mutare district and we have Makoni district. So I'll quickly add Mutare and Makoni districts. Okay, so let me just delete this in order for us to save time. Okay, then I'll also delete this row. Okay, so now that we have, so the first question is going to be asking them to select the province. So I'm sure you've also noticed that in this row, I am not leaving any white space. So this is more of like a variable. For those who are familiar with any programming languages, I'm sure when you're declaring any variables, you're not supposed to leave any spaces in between. So this is the variable that is then linked to what is then displayed to the user. So you're not supposed to leave any white space or even. So I'll also share some material with some guiding strategies to naming like your list names and your names. And then the label can also contain anything that you'd want now the user to like to see. So now I'm going to implement the cascading feature. So I only want people in Harare to only see the districts which are in Harare. So that is Epworth. So that is Harare, Epworth, and Chitungwiza. So what I'll do is I'll add a fourth column, which I will then call province again. So the column name should be equal to the list name. For the province relating to the district, which is here, is Harare. So take note that I'm using the name which is under this list. So this is going to be Harare. So this is for Epworth and Chitungwiza. And then for Mutare, it's under Manicaland. So I'll add that. So it's also wise to copy so that you don't do any spelling mistakes. So now that this is going to be filtered by the province. So the districts that you are seeing, the first 3 districts are going to be filtered by the province. So in this case, if I select Harare, I'm only going to see districts which are within Harare. If I select Manicaland, I'm only going to see the districts which are under Manicaland. So I'll then copy this. So after I've copied this, I'll go back into my KoboToolbox, and then I will go on this icon where it says Insert Cascading Select. So I'll then click on Cascading Select, and then I'll just basically copy that, and then I would have entered that. So unfortunately, I'm not sure why it copied this as empty. But now that we have a solid foundation, let's just re-enter this. So as you can see, the variable name here is Harare. So I'll just enter again Harare here. And then this is Manicaland. And then here it's Harare, Urban. And then this is Epworth. And then we have Chitungwiza. And then we have Mutare. And lastly, we have Makoni district. Okay, so if we are to save that, so let's just save that, and then we preview our form to see how it's going to look like. So let me just quickly close this group, close this group, close this group. So now that you see that our province question here, which is going to be asking the name of the province, if you click on Harare, we're only going to be seeing districts which are within Harare. If you click on Manicaland, we're only seeing districts that are under Manicaland. So this is a very good way of also trying to ensure data quality upon entry. So instead of having someone selecting a province as Harare and then having them select the district as Mutare, you would have also eliminated any data inconsistencies that might occur from the enumerators. Okay, so I think I've talked a lot. So now that we have our survey ready, let's just quickly finalize the survey. So I've resaved this survey, And now I want to deploy the survey. So in order for us to deploy the survey, I'll quickly go back to my KoboToolbox project page. So as you can see, the status of the survey is currently in draft. So draft basically means that the survey cannot be responded to yet and is not yet shared with the public. So I'll just reopen my survey, and then I'll go over to form. As you can see, if it says if you want to make changes public, you must deploy this form. So if I'm ready to collect any data with this form, I'll just simply click on deploy. But before we go on deploy, so if you also want to edit your form in a more advanced way using XLS, you can also download the XLS version of your form. It will also be downloaded like onto your device like that, and then you can then perform some advanced XLS operations, which we'll talk about in the next session to come. And then you can also manage translations. So I'll click on manage translations. Okay, so the current so this is where now you manage translations of your survey. So here it's saying please name your default language before adding languages. So the default language of this survey was in English. So I'll say the default language name is English. Then the default language code is EN. So I'll also provide a link to you in the session overview email that I'll send. It also has the link whereby you can find these codes. So I'll set like the default language to English. And then let's say I want to add Shona to this form. Add another language, and then I'll say Shona. And then the language code for Shona is SN. And then I'll add that. Okay. Now that I've added Shona to my to my language list, I'll then click on update translations. Okay. So now if I click on update translations, you then start to see that this is the original string, which was from the original form that I designed in English. So here's the demo. It's asking the group name, which is the demographic. Then it's saying enter your name. So if I click on any field, so let's say unfortunately I do not know the Shona name for demographic, so I'll skip to enter your name. So I'll translate this to Shona, and then I'll say Isa Zita Rako Pano. And then I'll say, what is your full name? Zita Rako Unonzi Ani. Then if there are any other questions that you also need to save, you can also save those. So one other thing that I also like to mention is that whenever you're going to be doing these translations, so translating is just looking at the question, what it is asking, and then you just click on the column adjacent to the question, then you translate that to the language that you want. So what I'd also like to mention is that in instances where we have calculations, for example, we have duty tax, this is supposed to be left like that. So in this case, I'll just say, let's say this in Shona will be duty raucha badara. So I'll say duty raucha badara. So please don't mind the spelling mistakes that are currently occurring. So in order for you to reference the same data columns. So for variables which are stored within KoboToolbox, these cannot be translated. So if you are storing a value named duty text, this cannot be translated into anything, even if it's French, Ndebele or Shona. You simply state it as it is, because if you enter any other name here, your form will not be able to pick up that variable name. So it's also wise to leave it as it is if there's any variable. So once you're done with the translations, you then simply need to click on Save Changes, and then I'll exit this form. Now that I'm ready to share my form with everyone, I just simply need to click on Deploy. So here it tells me that the form has been deployed, and then once it's ready to be shared with the public, here is the key step that most people are not usually aware of. So One thing I would like to mention is that for you to share the link, you don't necessarily need to copy the URL, which is displayed here. You only need to copy the URL, which is under this collect data section. So you just click on copy, and then it says copy to clipboard. Or if you want to see how your form will look like, it will open Encanto Express for KoboToolbox. And then, as you can see, my form is trying to access my location. So I'll allow this on every visit. And then, as you can see, my location is also automatically being auto-detected. So it is automatically also like detected my location where I'm currently at. And this is how the form is going to appear to the end user. But unfortunately, they are not going to be able to see this form until we fix on this manual step. So as you can see here, we have this box which tells you that this is a new feature. You can now control whether you can allow anonymous submissions to each project. So given the fact that our respondents are not essentially going to be KoboToolbox users, we need to have people responding to the survey anonymously without having to enter a username and password. So you can click on allow submissions to this form without username and password. And now that I've allowed anyone to share this form, or rather to respond to this form without a username and password, if I am also able to just share this form in the public with like in the chat like this, you will now be able to access this form. But if I remove this, then KoboToolbox will require you to enter a username and password for your own account. And then lastly, while it was still on this page, I'd also like to mention that the collect data feature is also handy. So if you come over here, as you can see, by default, it says this form allows you to collect data online, offline for multiple submissions. So there are also various options which also exist. So the default one is online, offline, multiple. And then the other next version is online only. So this will only allow the form to be used online. And then we have online single submission. So this allows you then to enter a return URL. So let's say you provided a form and you want people to respond to the form, and then they are redirected to your website. You can use this. And then you have the online only once per respondent. So this feature is handy in the sense that you can share a link with someone, and then the form will store what is known as a cookie like on their browser. So this cookie then prevents them from resubmitting another submission to their form. But however, if someone tends to use a different browser, or if they open the browser in incognito mode, or if they clear their browser cookie sessions, they can still be able to respond to that survey. So another feature is you can also be able to embed this form over into your website. So it provides you with HTML5 code snippet that you can embed onto your website. And then if you want the form to be used only for testing, to say if you want maybe like your team to just go through the form without actually submitting any data, you can use this view only. And then you can share out with your team to say, I've created this survey, and you kindly review before I share it out with everyone. Then they can get to test like the form. And if they make a submission, it doesn't really go into your database. And then lastly, we have the Android application. So I'll select this. So this will only allow the form to be submitted via the KoboCollect like application. So I think I'll also touch more into setting up the KoboCollect application quickly before we end the session. And then before we do that, I'd also like to mention that if there are any responses to the form, this will be shown in the data column section here. So let's just say my name. Let's just quickly fill in this form. Let me just try to skip most of the questions since they are optional. And then click that yes, no, no. And then 5, 5, 4, Harare, Eben. And then I submit. So once I have submitted that data, So my data has been successfully submitted. If I refresh my table, the data will also appear in my table like this. So for those who are asking how to download your data, so once the forms start coming in, you simply need to go on downloads, and then you can select the type of export that you want to make. So in this case, I can export as an XLS, as a CSV, as a GeoJSON, in any other formats that you want. So let's use the CSV. And then I would like the value to use my English format. And then if there are any advanced features that you want to turn on, so you can also explore these whereby you can select only the questions that you want to export. For now, we will not touch on that. And then you click on export. So KoboToolbox will process an export of your data, and then you can download the data that you've exported, and then it will be downloaded onto your machine like that. Okay, so let's quickly go over to the form page and say we want this form to be filled in using the Android application. So the Android application that we're going to be using here is called the KoboCollect app. So let me just quickly connect to my device and quickly demonstrate how we can connect to KoboCollect app. Okay. So that is starting. Okay. So this is my mobile device that so I already have KoboCollect installed. So if you haven't installed KoboCollect, you can also install KoboCollect from the Google Play Store. So KoboCollect is also available on Google Play Store. Then once you've downloaded that, you can then click on open. So you have two options here. You can either configure KoboCollect using a QR code, which will then scan, and then it will scan all the project details, and then you're logged in automatically. Or you can enter your project details manually. So let's enter our project details manually. So the URL that is required to use here is the URL that has been provided over here. So if you can see, we are provided with the URL here. So I'll go over and copy that. And then I'll bring back my screen, and then I'll paste that URL, and then I'll enter the username that I'm using. So in this case, the username that I'm using is KMSpatial. So I do not actually need to enter my password if my form can be accessed by anyone. So this is actually a good feature if you're going to be sharing forms with anyone over the web. So over here, let me just also add in my username. I think I also shared a video on how to do this in the KoboToolbox Zimbabwe community group. So then I click on add, and then I'll then go to download forms. So the forms that would have downloaded will then appear on my mobile device. So this is the session number 2 form that we have created, and as you can see, it's also available for download on my application. And if I want to download that form, I'll just click on get selected form, and then whenever we're in the field now, we can actually go over and data. Okay, so we actually go over and turn off our data, and then we can also start our data collection like that. So it's just be a matter of just opening that form, and then we now go in to type in the data requirements that are required by our form. Okay, so I think that's it about today. I'm not sure if I have left out on anything that requires illustration or demonstration. I think I'll quickly go into the chat box and see if we have any questions that could have came up. Okay, I'm not seeing that there are no questions. The only questions that are currently in the chat box are relating to Power BI. Okay, so I think in the next session, we'll then get to explore the advanced features and then also learn how to connect our data to automated processes like Power BI, ArcGIS, and even Tableau. But in the meantime, I'll also be able to share in some resources via email regarding to this. So if there are any questions, please just throw them in the chat box, or you can just unmute and then I'll be able to respond to them. I know we have reached our 1 hour, 30 minutes is up, and we should be adjourning this training session very soon. So I'm resharing the attendance registration form. If anyone hasn't filled in that yet, and by the end of this session, you'll be able to receive your certificate of participation in this second session of KoboToolbox. Not sure if we have any questions. We have a comment saying thank you. Yeah, thank you again to you. This is an iterative process. As we are also going through the session, I was also getting to learn some of the new features that have also been added before I also actually came in. Before I actually came onto this session. So yeah, please feel free to also engage in the WhatsApp chat group. So let me just copy the link to the WhatsApp chat group as well, so that if there are any people on the call that have not yet joined our WhatsApp community group, they can also be able to become part of the group. So let me just copy the link. Okay, so I've sent also the link to the WhatsApp group. If you're not yet part of the WhatsApp group, that's the joining link. So once you join, you can just introduce yourself, where you're coming from, and how you are using or you intend to use Kobo. Okay, yeah, so there's a question that says, are you going to share the video? Yes. So after this session, I'll compile the video that is saved on Zoom, and then I'll also be able to share it once I share the session overview email with everyone who's also on the mailing list and those that could not be able to join. And then maybe just to also share that our next session will be on advanced form building, whereby we're now going to be learning about the advanced features using the real XLS forms, and then also to integrate our forms with Power BI, ArcGIS, and any other software, even Google Colab. So even Google Looker Studio, and even Tableau, and Microsoft Power BI. Not sure if there are any questions. If there are any burning questions, we can all feel free to type in the chat box or to unmute, and then I can respond to them before we call it a day. I see Tendai is happy about the session. Yeah. So hopefully in the next upcoming sessions, we also get to hear from some of the organizations that are currently using KoboToolbox in Zimbabwe, so that we make this more of like an interactive process, and it's not just me who's talking, and then we also get to interact of any key challenges and any key pointers that they'd also like to share with the community. Remember, this is a community and we are all learning. So I see that there are no questions or comments coming in. So we'll then adjourn this training session, and then I'll also let you know of when we are having our next session. So thank you very much for attending. We'll be seeing you in the next upcoming sessions.